really excited to introduce you to Nina DeRosa, who is a retired nurse and lifetime gardener. She became an Extension Master Gardener in 2016, and she's currently the coordinator of the Organic Vegetable Garden and also spends a lot of time caring for her own flower and veggie garden. Nina loves learning and loves to share information with others to improve their gardening experiences, and we're so happy that Nina's agreed to give us this conversation this morning. So thanks, Nina, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's great to be joined by such great gardeners, and I hope that this information helps you with your gardening. So today we're going to talk about companion planting. So we have friends and foes of different plants that we're going to be planting in our garden. We're going to talk about where these ideas came from and which ones we think are notable. So what is companion planting? Companion planting is planting two plants together that benefit each other or in some way protect them from animals as sacrificial or trap crop, or some way increase the flavor, or in some way enhance the growth pattern of the other plant. So basically what we're really encouraging you to do with companion planting is to grow an ecosystem in your yard. And we want everything to work together under the soil, above the soil, and we think that companion planting is a good way to get that started. So before we dive into companion planting, we want to talk about where did all this come from? And you know that a lot of it is not science-based, but it's passed down, information passed down from generation to generation. And some we really don't know where it comes from, like our tomato and basil that we do. It just seems really good. A nice caprese salad growing together, minus the cheese. So in the research that I did for this talk, I found that there's a lot of history on companion planting, and it goes way, way back to ancient Iraq. Okay, that's Mesopotamia, and they grew legumes with their wheat and barley because we know that the nitrogen supplied by the legumes will help the yield of the wheat and barley. The Greeks planted roses around their grapes in order to detect mold, white mold early, and then they could treat their wine and save their crop. In medieval times, that's when it really started a revolution in companion planting. And you can imagine if we didn't have any other resources to grow vegetables and our life depended on what we grew in our gardens and our farms, people would do all kinds of creative things to help the yield and protect their crops. And of course, the most famous one started in North America, and it's the Three Sisters. And of course, that was a sustaining crop for the indigenous Indians in the Americas. And we know that the beans, the corn, and the squash grew together. The beans fixed the nitrogen, the corn gave structure, and the squash added minerals and nutrients to the soil and also kept the soil, it was like a living mulch. So we also know that the beans gave the indigenous Americans a lot of protein. The corn gave them some carbohydrates, and the squash provided nutrients that weren't provided in either of those crops. Yet there's no scientific evidence that increases the yield or it does anything to improve the soil quality. But it kept many, many, many indigenous people alive. They lived in very harsh climates. Back in the medieval time, the monks and the abbesses, they were the ones who had the knowledge. They didn't share it, they kept it to themselves. But this particular abbess shared it. She wrote many, many books, and she expanded our information on medical and herbal use, some of the practices that we use today. Of course, in Florence, the Boboli Gardens, they were a very good demonstration of companion planting. And over 1,000 years ago, Chinese planted mosquito ferns along with their rice to fix the nitrogen and shade out any competing plants. Of course, Darwin, this is the very interesting thing. Darwin observed in Britain that some towns had better hay production than others, and he was interested in discovering why. And he learned that one town was loaded with kind of spinster old women who loved cats, and they had a ton of cats in this town. The cats went after the mice, and you know, mice are predators of bees. They often eat the larvae and they eat the honey. Even though they get stung, I guess they're looking for food, so they do that. So the bee colonies were destroyed in that town. So the clover wasn't getting pollinated. And of course, we found out that clover and hay together are great companion planting, and they increase the yield of the hay production. And he found that that was the reason why some towns had better hay production than others. But this companion planting is mainly to establish beneficial relationship from one plant to the other. If it does this, then we know it's kind of in the companion category. So does it improve the soil? Does it have a natural pest control? Is it increased pollination? And of course, if we attract the beneficials, we're going to get the better pollination, which will also end up in a better yield. They can suppress weeds, and they can maximize space and sometimes enhance flavors of one another. So what we want to do is, our insect population is crashing. We need to support this. And by supporting it with planting all kinds of diverse flowers in your garden, you're going to make your garden more resilient and much more abundant. So we look for crops. This is called dynamic accumulators. And we call these crops that have extremely deep roots and that they mine the minerals and water from deep below the subsoil. And they bring it up to the surface so that they're going to benefit the plants that are near them. And they're going to increase the microbes because they have a different type of microbe than the shorter root crops. So that's going to benefit in a way. And some examples of this are lupine, comfrey, buckwheat, daikon radishes are great. We use daikon radishes in our garden. We had one bed that was just plagued by soil-borne bacteria. And one year we just planted daikon radishes, and hopefully that brought it up, broke up the soil, and kind of got rid of that soil-borne bacteria for us. And it did work. Asparaguses and borage are very good crops for a dynamic accumulation, among other things. But right now we're going to include them in this topic. There's also nitrogen fixing plants. And we all know that legumes are famous for this. There's over 50 different plants. And sorghum has been a topic of interest in Africa. They plant sorghum with their cereal crops, and it seems to help disease control because, Africa, they have very short food supply, and they want to do everything they can to make their crops succeed. It also improves the soil, of course, because the roots. Some companion plants provide soil protection if you grow them close together, but not too close to prevent air circulation. They will protect the soil against wind and rain. And you know that when it rains, the rain splashes on the soil and it can kick up soil-borne diseases onto your plants. So you want to plant fast-spreading or deep-rooted plants for this particular effect. Also, we can plant companion plants as a living mulch. So stop calling wood chips and leaf and plant these. Some farmers plant clover in their walkways because it's an added addition to their crops. So the cover crops cover the gaps in the ground. So they're suppressing weeds and keeping all the moisture in, moderating the temperature, which we have a big problem now in Virginia. It's extremely hot, and it's affecting the germination and production of our vegetables. You want to add as much diversity as you can to attract as many beneficial pollinators as you can. You want to keep the moisture in the soil. We have a lot of hot days, and we don't want to be watering every single day. We want to conserve water. So this is a good way to do that. Some examples of the plant would be creeping thyme, sweet woodruff. These are all beautiful flowers. Foam flower in green and gold. If you want to check out Nova Natives, they have a very complete list of all these cover crops that you can use. They're ground covers. I call cover crops, but it's ground covers. Not only do you use companion planting for the roots, underneath the roots, but we also use it for the leaves and for the flowers. These plants get really big, and you can trim them back so that they don't smother the plants that they're being planted next to. And you could chop and drop them in the soil. And we can see that comfrey, which is a beautiful plant, and that's a picture of it right there. If you do buy comfrey for your yard, make sure you buy Bocking 14. And it's a sterile plant, so it won't spread all over your garden. So sometimes if you buy it and it's not that, it'll be very aggressive. So make sure you buy Bocking 14 comfrey. It will add nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus to your soil. Everything that we're doing here is slow release, so it's really good for your plants. You're not dousing it like you do with synthetic fertilizers. You douse it with phosphorus and nitrogen, and the soil can't handle it, so it washes out into the groundwater, and that isn't good for our streams and rivers. Borage is a beautiful flower, and that will add nitrogen to your soil if you use that as a mulch. Yarrow, you can compost that. That grows crazy, and you can trim it and just either put it in your compost or use it as a mulch, and it'll release potassium into your soil. Now, microbial diversity, how do we get that in our soil? And of course, it's roots. Our soil should have live living roots in it at all times. And we try and do that with cover crops and vegetables. We do crop rotation and succession cropping. So we keep things in there constantly, because the roots and the microbes in the soil are what protects your soil and gives it nutrients. So that is an important thing. If you have all kinds of different flowers with different depth roots, you're going to get an abundance of all kinds of nutrients and water supply from your soil. And it will benefit the structure of your soil as well. So your plants will be able to fight disease and bits be more resilient. So when we plant flowers, companion flowers in our garden, we're also attracting pollinators. And pollinators can be insects, moths, birds, all kinds of things. And if you've ever looked at the food chain, you know that the food web, we have to have a variety of insects. The animals get larger and larger, and they eat on each other. And that what keeps the control of each population. But now we have broken that because people are insect phobic and they don't like insects. Insects are good. We want them, and they will control each other if we let the populations grow. So to attract them, we want to get swaths or big clumps of the flowers together. They don't have to be in the beds of the vegetables. They can be in pots near, or they can be like at our garden, our vegetable garden. We have a big gate because we're in a park and we have a big, heavy deer problem. So we have a 22-foot fence around it. But outside the fence, we have put in a wildflower garden of natives. And we help to attract as many beneficials as we can. So you can do that on your property if you have the space. You can grow a native garden somewhere else, and it'll definitely help your vegetables. So what you're doing is you're creating a habitat for your insects. You're providing them a home, and you're providing them food. You want them to be in your garden. We sacrifice a part of our herbs to go to seed, or a part of our greens, like our arugula in the middle there. It grows this beautiful white flower. We let that grow. After the harvest and it bolts, we let it go, and it attracts a lot of bees. The garden is just loaded with insects. On the bottom, we have basil. We let that go to seed. Of course, if you let it go to seed, it will affect the flavor of the herb. So you really have to have that as a separate intentional area where you let that herb go to seed. And then the thyme, the creeping thyme, or the culinary thyme, you can let that go to seed too. And it looks beautiful. We know that things in the garden need to be pollinated. So squash, pumpkins, things like that, they have separate male and female flowers. So we depend on the birds and the insects to travel from one flower to the next to pollinate, so that we will have good pollination and a good yield. So tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants generally don't need to be pollinated because they have perfect flowers. One flower will have everything they need in there, the male, the female, and everything, so that the insects that go there will enhance that pollination, which is caused through wind, they do wind pollination. So usually that will increase. You'll get a better seed quality, and you'll get better fruit set through pollination. Companion planting can enhance flavors, and I really never did a test on this, but this is what I found, that chives will improve the taste of parsley. And you know that if you plant things near, like garlic, if you plant garlic near tomatoes, it will affect the flavor. If you're not a very discerning taster, you might not notice it, but it does change the flavor. Marjoram will affect the basil, and it will taste sweeter. And I'm going to try this one this year because I love basil. I can't get enough basil. And I also have a dehydrator for the basil this year, so I can keep it. And then some of it I will grate up and put in oil, blend in oil for cooking. That's my favorite one. Mint is really good and enhances the flavor of your brassicas. And garlic and mint improve the flavor of beets. I haven't tried that one either, but it's fun. Any questions so far?
Yes, Nina, we have a couple of questions. I'll start with a couple that are focused around the nitrogen benefits of nitrogen fixation. So, Philip wanted to know if the nitrogen benefit of legumes happen just by growing or only by chop and drop from decay of above ground parts. And I'll
Okay.
also note that Madeline in the chat mentioned a note about using legumes to fix nitrogen. She mentions that if your soil has a lot of nitrogen, the legumes will not create the nodules that store nitrogen. So you use a green mulch on your legumes, they may not form the nodules that you want for long-term nitrogen release. So do you have any thoughts or perspectives on the nitrogen fixation properties?
Yes, nitrogen fixation comes from the roots of the legumes. And if you've ever dug up, which you shouldn't ever do, a legume root, you'll see these little bulbs, little things that grow on the roots. Those are nitrogen. You're supposed to leave those in the soil and they will slow release nitrogen into the soil. Now, I never heard about if you feed your legumes, which we never do because they make it. So don't waste your mulch on your legumes because they don't need it. They're already self-sufficient. But isn't nature beautiful that you give it something and it stops? And that's, I could bring that on to synthetic fertilizers. That's what it made me think of. When you use synthetic fertilizers, you kill the soil because you're supplying something and the rest of the soil will shut down because you've already provided it and it won't make its own. So don't do that because you need everything to work with nature. You need the soil to make what it needs. So don't interfere. We don't know better than nature. Anything else?
Yeah,
I'd
just a
like
couple
to
more
hear your
questions. So
question.
Philip wonders if there was a moment when monocropping became more popular.
Absolutely. And that was after World War II, I believe. We had excess nitrogen left over from, I think, the production of the atomic bomb, and they wanted to do something with this. And they decided that they were going to I don't know how they came up with it, but I guess someone had knowledge that nitrogen was important in farming. So they made synthetic. And they said, oh, we love corn. So let's grow 50 million acres of corn and we'll give it nitrogen. And this worked out great for the producers because people love corn or they love soybean because they can get a lot of money for growing that. So that's when it came. And it also came with the industrial move to the conventional farming methods, which really led to the downfall of our soil. We
Mm.
killed our soil. And that's when the Dust Bowl came and we completely ruined it. We killed it. So there was no living things in our soil. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. I kind of diverted.
That was good. And we have a couple more questions still. So
Okay.
Kat has another question about legumes and nitrogen. And Kat
Okay.
wants to know, do the legumes need to stay alive to keep giving the nitrogen, or can you chop the tops off and leave the roots in when you plant a new crop?
Yes, you have to do that. Okay.
Okay.
While they're growing next to something, they're growing their nitrogen and they're sharing that. When they're done, you cut the plant off at the level of the soil and leave them there. And you should do that with every single plant that you grow in your garden. Do not take the roots out. Cut it, leave it there, and don't disturb your soil. Put some more compost on top and plant right into that. That is the best method to date. It's called no-till, and it doesn't destroy the microorganisms that are in your soil, and it doesn't break up the soil structure, which takes a long time to build. You know, we could talk all about that, but if you research soil structure and
Yep.
aggregation and microbes, that's a whole nother topic. I hope that
Good.
answered your question.
And there's one final question before we keep going
Thank
here.
you for your
Um,
questions.
yeah, there was a question about violets and whether or not violets had any benefit in the vegetable garden. We do know, of course, that violets do support some local pollinators, but the person in the chat was mentioning that the violets were tending to take over. So do you have any thoughts on violets and
No,
companion planting
violets
over
are
the
good.
garden?
We're actually, one of our gardeners is a naturalist also, and she incorporates the thinking of naturalism, and she's putting violets in our garden. If there's an aggressive plant, but it comes out easy, it doesn't have rhizomes, and it's not going to take over your garden, I'm not afraid of it. There's lots of things that we have that are aggressive that just pop right out, and you can thin them out and share them or put them in your compost. So don't be afraid to try things, but make sure you understand how they spread. Because if it's difficult, I planted this thing called the giant St. John's wort. I got it in a show. It was a native, I don't know where it came from, but it looked good. You know how you go to the store and you buy, oh, this is great. I put it in my yard and I could kill myself for doing that. It took over the front yard. I turned my back and it was everywhere. So got rid of that. One of our instructors, she'd always say, the right plant for the right space. You
Mm-hmm.
had a hill that had a lot of erosion. This thing, I actually did give it to my son, who was a big problem. This is golden. It's a right place for it, but not in my front yard. So think about how it grows. Take a look at the root structure or look it up before you plant it. It'll
Yep.
save you a lot of aggravation. And
Yep.
I've heard that Jerusalem artichokes are another one that you don't want. And if you do want those things, maybe try growing them in a pot so you can see how it grows and don't ruin your garden. So give it a chance to grow. Oh, we're going to do this for pest control, companion planting. And of course, anytime you plant something, because insects kind of are specialized to some extent on what they like to eat. So the more plants you have in your garden, the better. Okay. But make sure you know how they grow. You want to know the characteristics. What is in that plant? What do they supply to the ground? What do they need? Are they heavy feeders? So you need to do a little bit of upfront information. Just don't go willy-nilly and buy things because you like them. We all go through that phase, but do a little bit of research. It won't hurt, or ask the people at the garden shop, the plant shop. Okay, I'm just going to tell you about these tomatoes. So this is what we're talking about, pest control. Tomatoes get aphids. We know that the aphids are eaten by soldier beetles, mites, ladybugs, wasps, lacewings, and hoverflies. That's a whole group of insects, right? So if we wipe out 3 or 4 of these different genuses of insects, we're going to have an overpopulation of aphids. And that goes with the soldier beetles. They're eaten by dragonflies, frogs, spiders, and sparrows. So if you diminish the population of any of those, it's definitely going to adversely affect the population of the soldier beetles. And it goes on to laceworms and ladybugs. So we need to keep the food chain intact. And the better you can do that, the more resilient your garden will be. So with the companion plants, what you're doing is you're creating a habitat for these insects. Okay. You want them to come in, you want them to live there so that they don't have to go elsewhere to find a place to live and to eat. You want them there so that they will go and peruse your vegetables and eat all those bad things that you don't want on your vegetables. It's just simple as that. There's this thing called allelopathy, and it can either benefit or harm. And we all talk about black walnut. I mean, everybody knows black walnut trees. Nothing grows under a black walnut because it secretes a substance that prevents anything from growing. We have marigolds do this, and they do this with a little bit of weed suppression. And there is evidence, there is scientific, I'll tell you about that in a minute, but they deter nematodes in the soil, harmful nematodes. This is companion planting. It's a way to make nature work for you. It might be not 100%, but it will aid. And anything that you can do to make your garden better, I think is a plus, and to make it look beautiful. Nasturtiums are a great trap crop, and I have a picture of how we use that in our garden, and it was so exciting. We just did it this Wednesday. I took pictures. And we've also talked about the basil and the tomato. I mean, it just makes sense. They attract aphids. Sometimes you sacrifice some plants, but if you know you've had aphids before and you've had these diseases, overplant that crop so that you won't totally lose your crop. You'll just have to sacrifice some of it and try and maintain it to harvest what you can. So you want to make a hostile environment for insects by encouraging beneficial insects and by deterring them with all kinds of smells. They say that if you create hostile environments with different plants, smells, looks, that's great. And that'll help you in your garden. So this is the study I found about French marigolds. There's specific marigolds that work best. Here's a few categories. And they do kill root knot nematodes in the soil. This study said that if you grow them before you're going to plant your crop that's susceptible to this root knot, it'll help in their production. So not planting together, but in advance. But of course, we all do planting together because it looks so pretty. And I don't know if it really works because I actually had a bed of peppers and I planted these marigolds that took over. No, it was eggplants. They took over the bed and totally smothered out my eggplants. I was trying to prevent I can't remember what it was. It's a little black bug. I have drawing the blank. But anyway, it killed the eggplant and it did nothing to prevent that insect. I guess it did because it killed my eggplants. So that was not good. And of course, leave the roots in the soil. If you remember anything out of this talk, is that. So a natural pest control, you want to plant cilantro, sage, dill. They draw all kinds of insects. Ladybugs can eat 50 aphids a day. So the more of those babies you have, the better off you are. I had aphids on my peppers last year, and it was covered in ants. And I was like, what is this mess? I couldn't even pick a pepper without getting covered in ants. And I later discovered, I'm sure some of you know, that the ants keep the aphids alive. They feed them, they carry them around, they treat them like gold because the aphids exude a sap, a honey-like thing that feeds the ants. So what you have to do is get rid of the ants, and then the aphids will die. So you want to sprinkle some cinnamon. You could try that. If not, if all fails, diatomaceous earthworks around the plant. But you have to be diligent because if it rains, then you got to reapply. So here's some interesting pictures of what natural pest control looks like. You have the parasitic wasps that lay their larvae on the hornworm. We've actually had several of those in our garden, and we had the camp for kids, and they were just completely enthralled with this. They thought it was so gross, but it's amazing. So you kill those bugs right up front, and the ladybugs eat the aphids, and these fly larvae will eat the aphids too. So there's a lot of things that will work towards controlling a specific insect, but you don't have to learn how the insects work. Just plant a ton of flowers. There's over 1 million species of parasitic wasps, and they each have a beneficial effect on agriculture. As a matter of fact, they are used in agriculture to control diseases now. People will order larvae, wasp larvae, and they will put them in their fields, and they will use those to deter harmful insects. And if they do have hedgerows, which they've completely gotten rid of, which is so silly, the wasps will find a habitat near the farm, and they will live there and continue to stay there if you provide a habitat for them. So wasps like a lot of different flowers. They like flowers that are umbral. They look like umbrellas. And dill, gone to seed, is one of them. And we have seen that in our garden, that they attract wasps. If you research this, a lot of wasps that we're talking about, they don't sting. There's a few, like the yellow jackets, they do sting, but they're beneficial too. So don't kill any insects, please. And they also like composite flowers, and they're just flowers made up of different petals. And they like blue, yellow, white, and purple. I love that in my garden too. I can't get all those colors, but I try. Native allelopathy, it suppresses the growth of others, and alliums, it just brings to mind sunflowers or onions, garlic. They release a sulfur compound that inhibits root growth in certain plants, and especially beans and peas, because they are nitrogen fixing. And these alliums stop that. They don't allow the bacteria to help them with their nitrogen fixing, so their roots don't grow. Alliums go good with beets, tomatoes, strawberries, lettuce. This is a hard one. I've looked this up one a couple of times, and you get conflicting information. So just check this out before you use it. But I think that this is pretty good information here with the beets. I didn't include everything. They say that it's good with brassicas, but they're both heavy eaters. So I would say be careful of those, alliums and brassicas. I'm not so sure I would do that unless you planted them far away. So we talked about the sulfur-based compound they release. Asparagus and alliums are heavy eaters, just like the brassicas, and they require a lot of nutrients. So I would stay away from that. And of course, with any kind of plant you're doing, you don't want to put plants that require different soil characteristics. You don't want to put a cactus in with a swampy flower. That's just common sense. Alliums can impact the flavor of turnip roots. And also they will affect the development of grapevines because they have root competition and some kind of a chemical release. The odor thing, it's kind of maybe, maybe not, but I think that with peppermint, I think I've had success with that. And it says that it deters 90% of the insects. You'd have to work with how close you need it, but Any kind of mint should stay in a pot unless you want to have a whole mint yard because it's very aggressive. Alliums like garlic, chives, and onions are good for aphid control. Just make sure you plant it with something that it likes and it doesn't compete with. And fragrance like dill, basil, cilantro, they're supposed to help with brassicas. Just try things. It's fun and it looks pretty. The visual cues are used by insects. Okay, they definitely like green. They know green and they will land on green. They did a study with green construction paper and they left it on the ground. And insects would land on that. When they landed on it, they would know that that's not a leaf, but they were attracted to the green color. So that was a study that was proven. And they like different heights and textures. And it kind of is also used to throw them off guard. You know, if you have a different, all kinds of heights and smells and colors, the insects have to search a little bit before they find your delicious tomato. So trap crops are something that you're going to grow because you know that the insects like this crop better than the one that you're growing, that you want to yield. One that we use is nasturtiums with our tomatoes. And we know that this works. Okay. And if you do get a really, and your trap crop is just covered with bad insects, try and trim it. And I would throw it in the trash and see if it will come back. And if not, you'll need to remove that plant, throw it in the trash, and plant another one. They also say that spicy brassicas are great, but you need to plant different varieties. And of course, diversity is going to help you anywhere you plant. So this is a picture of our vegetable garden, and the tomatoes are in the background, and you can see this nasturtium is covered in aphids. It's just horrible. And it was an exciting thing to see that this actually did work. So I truly will recommend this because I saw it and it did work. And nowhere else did we find aphids. So we trimmed it and we're hoping that maybe it'll come back. If not, we'll have to remove this because it is heavily infested. Weed suppression, that just makes sense. If you have a whole bunch of stuff growing on the ground, you're not going to get a lot of weeds. And also, if you have good soil, you won't have a lot of weeds. So I would definitely try this. So this is like your squash or things that are grown under your plants, like your basil under your tomatoes. Of course, you want to keep your tomato leaves trimmed up about a foot off the ground because you don't want any of that splash to come up and with rain. Because we know that when we water, we always water the roots. We use a drip system or a hose that oozes out water. You don't want to water from above. You're just asking for trouble. So plant things under your plants, not too close. Keep an eye on airflow and watering. I like irrigation systems, but I like to check on my plants at least every other day to make sure that things are going well. Because if you turn your back on your garden, you know, you come back and it's disaster. It's a full-time job. Maximizing space, you use companion planting for, you fill in the gaps. And others will argue that this is not companion planting, it's interplanting because it's not really helping. But if you plant something like the squashes or something that's going to cover the soil, I kind of think that's helping. But if you really want to nerd out, that's not an actual companion planting term. Interplanting is not considered companion planting. It's just semantics. I think it is. Vining plants you can grow on the ground to shade the ground, or you can grow up taller structures like the beans and the corn. Succession planting. This is another one. It could be called relay planting, where you're growing a cold crop and you plant your next crop for the warm weather underneath it or alongside of it, so that when that is terminated, you'll already have your warm crop growing. And I think it's kind of companion because you're shading it out, you're protecting it from the wind, the small, tender, warm weather crops. So it's kind of benefiting it, I think. The shallow and deep roots are companion planting because they're not fighting for the same nutrients and water. There's different substrates in the soil where they go and find their nutrients. So they grow really well together. They also say that plants that require the same thing are good together, like alliums. They say that you can grow alliums together, onions and garlic or whatever. But, you know, you're still requiring nutrients for that specific type of a plant. So I don't know, I think I'd throw some companion planting there to help them, some beans or something, just to give them a little bit more nutrients. And if you plant taller ornamental plants, you can cover your lettuces or your greens that are cool weather crops. You provide them shade so that you can extend the harvesting period, because once those plants get too much sun, they bolt. Okay, and that's not a bad thing because you can let them flower, leave them in there a little bit longer, and plant the next crop down inside that. So the science of companion planting in the garden, it's a science. There's a lot of new information coming if you look on the web. But basically what you want to do is know your plant characteristics. Okay, before you plant something with another plant, find out what it likes at least. Is it a shady? Does it like what kind of soil? And plant it and think about it. Okay, should I plant this or should I plant that? So do two different things and say, well, I think this is going to be better, or just wait and see. And when you find out, wow, that worked really well, then you know you have a winner in your yard, because every yard has different soil, you have a different climate, and you really have to play with it. Don't get disappointed, okay? You plant things, it's supposed to be fun. It's a hobby. If our crops fail, we're not going to starve. It's not like, the old days. So this is fun. We know that garden grown vegetables are amazingly tasty and it's fun, but enjoy it, learn, and share your information. That's how I learned. We all work together in our garden and we go, oh, I did this and I did that. And we try things to see which works, and we record our successes so we can do it again. So here's some tips. Understand plant relationships. Okay, you really need to know what plant likes to go where and where you're going to grow it. You're not going to plant a hosta in the sun in a dry, horrible soil. We are familiar with what the plants do, but delve a little deeper just to know, and you'll have better success, and you won't waste a lot of plants. And the growing habits is what we talked about. And also, before you plant a garden, just do a soil test to see where you are. If you're going to plant blueberries and you do a soil test and find out your soil's alkaline, well, you're not going to succeed, because acid-loving plants will not do well in an alkaline soil. So what you can do is grow something that will help the soil and add sulfur to your soil and nurture that soil. In a couple of years, then maybe you'll be able to plant your blueberries. So I want you to plant with intention, garden with joy, and reap in abundance. And I hope that you enjoyed this show. Here are some sources you can look at. These books are great. I've read some of them. There's another book that No Till, it's a YouTube channel, and he has a book called Living Soil, which is a really good resource. And there's databases, and there's so much information, too much. It's crazy. And these are articles that I use specifically for this talk. And thank you for zooming in. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thanks, Nina. We have some more questions in the chat. Anne mentions that she has tomatoes, peppers, and herbs that are all planted in pots. She wants to know, do they have any sort of companion planting benefit but being placed side by side in pots, or do they need to be planted together in the same soil?
No, they do not need to be together in the soil. They can be in different areas. Like in our garden, we have our fenced in vegetable thing, and outside the gate, we have a perennial native garden. And that definitely draws insects in. You've got them in the proximity of your yard. So either put a little nasturtium in your tomato plant, in your pot, it'll really look pretty, and spice up your appearance of your pots with different herbs or whatever, and you'll get more yield. They're actually experimenting with double seeding in some farms where they'll plant dill with lettuce or cilantro with lettuce in the same plug. They'll plant it together and they put it out. It doesn't affect the yield. They help each other. So in the same space, you get double yield and benefit.
That's great. We have a question in the chat. If you could go back onto the slide where you have the list of books that you're recommending.
Ooh.
So maybe we can look at that while we're talking about the rest of these questions. The next question is about marigolds. So some folks in the chat were hoping you could talk a little bit more about a couple of aspects of marigolds, whether or not they help keep bad insects away from tomatoes, and also if it's too late to direct seed French marigolds at this point in the season.
I would definitely try and direct seed them. When we do it in our garden, for one thing, we were trying to get a vine on one of our trellises. We use cattle panels for trellises. And every year we have 5 or 6 of these and we grow vegetables and flowers on them. And we had a black-eyed Susan vine I planted 3 times and nothing happened. So definitely try the seed, check back, reseed, baby it a little bit. And if all else fails, try it next year. It started inside. But once you get marigolds going, I never have to plant another one because I told you I had like a marigold backyard and
Yeah.
now we have thousands of them growing without doing a thing.
I had the same challenges with black-eyed Susan vine. It was very difficult to germinate. Amanda has a question for you about companion planting in perennials. Amanda says that she has a bed this year with peppers, oregano, dill, nasturtium, and marigolds. Since the
Beautiful.
oregano and dill will come back next year, does that limit what she can plant there next year?
No, not at all. I like to put mine on the edge and then put my crops in the middle or do like a zigzag so you get more space. So definitely don't be afraid. There are some gardeners that I work with, they don't want anything near their plant. They want it, this is my tomato, don't put anything near it, because it competes. There is a thinking that, and it's true, that when you have new things that you're planting, don't put anything near it because it competes with nutrients to get that plant started. So wait till they're established before you start loading things into the bed.
We have a question in the chat asking if it's better to separate herbs instead of keeping them together in the vegetable garden.
Well, it depends on aesthetically what you like. I like them all smushed together. It looks really pretty. It's like a carpet of delicious food. And it's just for me, I like it. And it doesn't hurt them to be all smushed together. And I would thin them out periodically because they do go crazy, and share them with your friends or save them for a plant sale or whatever.
Another question about alliums. Philip heard it was good to plant garlic with strawberries to keep mammals away, like rats and rabbits,
It is.
but wonders if the garlic also reduces the strawberry growth.
No, I've never done it, but what I've read, it says they grow together. And like what we were talking about, experiment, I would take part of your strawberry bed and intermingle garlic and keep the other half free of garlic and see what you get. And
Great.
it's a good idea. We do this in our beds. They're about 20 foot long. We grow half of them with something like we have okra in one of them, and the other side we grow beans. So we are diversifying our garden. So
Yeah.
the more you can plant like a little bit okra here and okra in another part of the garden, spread it out. Even if you put okra in with your beautiful ornamentals, okra is a beautiful plant. And it's good to mix food and ornamentals together. It looks really pretty.
Yeah, I agree. Philip also mentions that he has a patch of red onions. How far away should they be from other plants to avoid negative effects?
Okay, well, they mainly don't like beans and peas. And I think most of them are okay. Check the list, which is not compatible with alliums. But I think that there are more things that are compatible than are not. They do deter the nitrogen fixing type plants.
Right. We have one more question for you. It's slightly off topic, but since you are the organic vegetable garden guru, I'm going to ask you anyway. So there's a question in the chat asking whether it's a bad idea to cover a raised bed with shade cloth over winter.
Absolutely not. I wouldn't do it with shade cloth, but there's another talk that I give about extending the growing season. And if you decide not to extend the growing season, you can cover it with at least 2 or 3 inches of leaf mulch. You can cover it with black plastic. You can cover it with, if you want to have a hoop thing, that's fine. But the main thing is, if you grow cover crop in there, it's the best thing because you have living roots. I would suggest that. And if not, then just keep it covered with a mulch or load it up with compost, and you're good to go for the next year.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Nina. That was the last question that we had to address in the
Thank you
chat
for your
box today.
questions, and
There's been
thank you so
plenty
much
of
for attending. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's been plenty of thank yous and congrats to you in the chat. It sounds like people really appreciated the conversation. I also want to extend a thank you to Nicole as well as to Elaine for being on the facilitation team today, and want to obviously thank you all as the audience for being with here us for another Friday morning conversation. Happy planting, happy growing, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks again.